Let's go ahead and learn a little bit about Git and GitHub. What exactly is Git? Git is a type of software called a version control system. This tracks changes to files. What this means is it will track all of your code changes, and you can use it to record different versions of your files at different points in time. Why should you use Git? Well, Git is beneficial in many ways. A few of the main reasons is that it includes save points. So if you make a code change and then you realize later that you made a mistake, you can revert back to an older version of that project. Git makes working with a team really easy. Every developer can work on their own copy of a project on their own computer. A copy of the project is stored in a folder connected to Git called a local repository or repo. The developers can send their code changes to the main repo, which is stored online, and then they can get code changes made by other developers. The place where we store our remote repos is github.com. It's easy to create alternate versions of your project. We do this by creating branches. These branches lend themselves to rapid prototyping. Whether you're a designer or a developer, you can go ahead and create a new branch, and it gives you a sandbox environment to experiment and play with. This lets designers and developers see how their changes will look in a real working copy of the product without the threat of breaking existing functionality. So what are all the different Git things? Well, Git is the actual version control software. GitHub is the internet hosting service for software development and version control using Git. And the GitHub desktop is a program that runs Git on your computer and allows you to do most of the Git command line prompts through a more visual program interface. It is possible to use the command line and completely use Git through the command line prompts. This tends to be a little bit more confusing for beginners or people that are more visual in nature. I'll be showing you how to use the GitHub desktop and using GitHub online so that you can manage projects. What you're going to need is to sign up for a GitHub account. You can do this by going to github.com. You're also going to need to download the GitHub desktop. You can do this by going to desktop.github.com. So go ahead and sign up for GitHub and download the GitHub desktop, and then I'll show you how you can use these to manage your own projects. Once you've gone ahead and downloaded the GitHub desktop, you're going to need to sign in with your account. I'm currently signed in online with my GitHub account. In order to sign in with the GitHub desktop, I'm going to go to GitHub, Preferences, and then I'll go ahead and sign up with my account. I'm going to click Sign In. It's going to prompt you to continue with the browser. I'll click that button. GitHub is going to ask me if I want to go ahead and open the GitHub desktop. I will confirm that. And now I'm signed in. Now before we get started working in GitHub, I want to go back to the preferences, and I just want to show you that here it shows that I am signed in. We also have some other categories in preferences which you can use to personalize your GitHub experience. Under integrations, you can specify the application that you want to use as an external editor. This will list all of the IDEs that you have loaded on your machine. I'm just going to use Visual Studio Code. You can also specify what you want to use for the command line. I'll leave this set to terminal. Under the Git category, you can go ahead and specify what the default branch name is for new repositories. If you've been using Git for a while, you might be familiar with using master as the main branch. Git has changed the name of master and now refers to the main branch as main. But if you come across any repos and you see main or master, they're basically the same thing. I'll leave mine set to main. Under Appearance, you can specify how you want your GitHub desktop application to look. You can either use the light theme or the dark theme, or you can have your system automatically switch to match the theme style that is being used on your computer. I'm going to leave mine at dark. For prompts, this is going to allow you to specify confirmation dialog boxes. I want these all checked, so I'm not going to make any changes there. And under advanced, you can go ahead and specify any of these sorts of changes that are going to occur when you switch branches. I do want it to ask me where the changes are going to go, and I'll go ahead and leave the rest of these settings at their defaults. It is important that you hit save even if you don't make any changes here, so that the preferences are going to be updated. The basic workflow for working with the GitHub desktop is that you'll need to work on a repository. Currently, you can see that GitHub is letting me know that I don't have any repositories on my virtual addiction account. I can either clone a repository from the internet, or I can create a new repository on my hard drive, or if I have already created a GitHub repo, I can add it as an existing repository from my local hard drive. I'll go ahead and create a new repository on my hard drive. I'm going to click this and we'll give the repository a name. I'm just going to call this example 1, and I'm going to give this a brief description. I'll browse and choose a folder of where I want this repo to exist on my computer. I'm going to choose to initialize this repo with a README file. The README file allows you to write a more detailed description of your project, and this is something that will actually show up within GitHub. So if you wanted to add instructions or more comments, you can do that using a README file. When we work with README files, we can use the markup language to style the README file. I do have a lesson on working with markup, and if you're interested in that, you can check in the description below for a link to that video. The Git ignore field allows you to specify the types of files that you don't want to add to the repo. As you can see, there are many choices here. I tend to usually leave this blank, and then I will augment my git ignore file as needed. That's what I'll show you how to do. And then finally, we have the license field. This tells people what they're allowed to do with your code in the repo. Many people opt to use the MIT license, which allows people to copy, distribute, and modify your code. If you leave this setting blank, the project is going to be licensed with the standard copyright. If you want more information on licensing, you can visit choosealicense.com, and this is going to provide all sorts of information on the different types of licensing and what they will allow you to do with your work. I'll go ahead and click Create Repository to create the repo. Now that we have a repo in our GitHub desktop, the GitHub desktop has some areas that allow us to control the repository. The first location is up here on the left, and this will list our current repository. If you have more than one repository loaded here, you will be able to easily switch between the various repositories. To the right of that, we are going to see the current branch. Branches are like different versions of our project, and we will talk more about branches later. Right now, I only have a main branch. That's the default branch that the repository comes with. Next to that is our Publish Repository button, which will allow us to publish the repository up to our online version of GitHub. If we move back over here to the left, the Changes pane is going to specify any changes that we've made to our project. This is bundled with the History tab, and this is going to list all of the commits that we have in our project. Currently, we just have the initial commit, and that was what was created when we first initialized the repository. If we go back to the Changes tab, down at the bottom portion of the Changes tab is our Commit panel. A commit is basically a save point that you can create during your development that includes a set of code changes that you want to track. Let's go ahead and open our project in Visual Studio so we can make some changes to our repository and see how this will affect our GitHub desktop. I've gone ahead and opened up my repo in Visual Studio Code. As you can see, we have the .git attributes, which was made by default. This is just going to provide some information about our Git repository. And then we have the README file. It is worth mentioning that any file names that start with a period are basically invisible files. So if you were going to look at this folder on your desktop, you would not see any of the files that start with a period. You will only see them in applications that display that, or if you've turned on preferences in your computer to show invisible files. I'll go back into Visual Studio and I'm just going to make a couple of files. We'll make a new file called index.html, and then I'm going to go ahead and just add some code to this page. I'll save the file, and then I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a styles folder, and inside the styles folder we'll place a new file. We'll just call this base.css. Now let's jump back into the GitHub desktop. As soon as I come back into the GitHub desktop, you will see that the Changes tab now appears differently. The Changes tab is going to list any files that have been changed from the last commit. These files are files that are staged. You will see to the right of the file name there is an icon with a green plus sign. This means that Git has detected a new file and it wants to add it to our repo and track any future changes. In the right-hand panel, we will actually see the code changes that we have made to the files. Any new additions to the files are going to be highlighted in green, and when we start to delete things, they will be highlighted in red. But because these files are all brand new, everything is going to appear as being green. To the left of the file names, there is a checkbox, which is checked by default. This indicates that these files are staged, which means that we want to include these files in our next commit. In order to create a commit, you're going to come down to the bottom portion of this pane, and we need to add a commit message. The commit message should be short and sweet and just summarize what you've done. If you want to include a longer description, you can go ahead and write that here. This is optional, but if you're working with other people, it can be very helpful. Now we're ready to make a commit. I'm going to click Commit to Main, and what happens is those files have now been committed into my project. Once the files are committed, they will disappear from the Change pane. If we go into the History pane, you will see the commit that we just made, along with all of the code changes from that particular commit. Because our file was created locally, currently it doesn't exist on GitHub, but if we click Publish Repository, it's going to upload those changes. Let's do that now. When we do this the first time, we have the example to assign a different name. I'm just going to simply use the same name as my local repo, and you can add a short description. You'll also have the option to keep this code private, which I'll do for this example since this isn't really very important. Or if we uncheck this, the file would be public. I'm going to click Publish Repository. GitHub is going to do its thing and go ahead and move the files. And now you'll see that the Publish button has now changed to say something called Fetch Origin. This is an indication that we've actually uploaded the file. Let's go into the browser so that we can see what's happened. I'll need to click the Refresh button, and once I do so, you will see that I now have a repository. So let's click on that. And here is my example 1 repository. If we click on the link for example 1, it's going to take us to the repository, and it's going to show us all of the things that are part of this repository. We have many of the same options available on our GitHub online version, but they do look a little bit different. If we wanted to modify the file at all, we could simply click the file name, and this is going to show us our code, and then we would click the pencil icon, which would allow us to edit the file. If we go back to the default repo, and I'm going to expand my page out a little bit, you can see that it tells me the time that the last commit was made, which was 2 minutes ago. I currently have 2 commits in this project, and this number right here is called a hash number. This is how GitHub tracks any of the changes that we make. Every commit is going to have its own unique hash number. If we click on that, it's going to take us to a page and it's going to show us all of the things that we've changed within that particular commit. You can also go ahead and write additional notes if you need to. I'll click example 1 to go back to the default example 1 page. Down here is the README file. And you can see that example 1 is large and bold, and then the demoing how to use GitHub is a little bit smaller. Once again, you can edit the README file here, And if you want to control how the README file looks, you would need to use the markup language. Let's go ahead and continue to make modifications to our GitHub project. I'll go ahead and modify my file and make some additional changes to the repo. So I'm going to go ahead and add something new to my index page. I'm also going to right-click and I'm going to create a new file. This is going to be called instructions.txt. This file could be any file type. I'm just using this as an example. Sometimes in your projects, you're going to want to include some files that you'll want to use locally, but maybe you don't want to necessarily upload them to the online version of GitHub. Well, you can do that as well. An easy way just to exclude one file from being uploaded is simply to uncheck it right here. When we uncheck it, the file is now not staged, and when we perform a commit, it will not be included. The other thing that I want to point out to you is if we go ahead and look at the instruction file, you'll see that it has the green plus sign indicating that it is brand new. Our index file has now a yellow plus sign. This is because this file already existed and we've now just made modifications to it. If I go ahead and make a commit message and commit to main, it's going to go ahead and commit that one file. You will see how the instructions.txt file does not get included. Now that I've performed the commit, I can go ahead and push the changes up to the online version of our GitHub repo. Let's do that now. Then we'll go ahead and check out the repo online. I'm going to click the refresh button, and you can see now we're up to 3 commits. If we click on the index page, we see the paragraph that we just added, but you will also notice that the text file has not been uploaded. Because we unstaged that particular item, it was not included when we performed the push to the online repo. In addition to unstaging files, we can also use the git ignore method of excluding certain files from being uploaded. If you have more than one file, using git ignore is an easier way to accomplish this. I'm going to go back to my code editor. I'll right-click, and I'm going to create a new file called .gitignore. This is once again an invisible file. If I choose to ignore the instruction.txt file, all I need to do is write the name of the file, and if I go ahead and save the gitignore file and we come back to the GitHub desktop, you will see how the text file is no longer visible. That's because the gitignore file is telling it to ignore that. Let's go ahead and make one more txt file. And once again, if I save this and jump back into the GitHub desktop, the new txt file is showing. That's because in our gitignore, we've only told it to ignore the one file. We could add the name of the new file, mynotes.txt, and save our gitignore, and then this file will disappear. It's important that you specify every file on its own line. And if the files are located in a different folder, you don't need to put the path to the folder. Git is smart enough to find the files as long as they're within your initialized repo. Instead of writing the names of all of the files, if I just want to always ignore text files, I can use the wildcard selector. And that just looks like this, *.txt. Now all text files are going to be ignored. So if we go into the style folder and we create a text file, you will see that if I come back to GitHub, none of the text files are going to show up. The gitignore file is effectively telling Git to ignore any text file that is in my repo, and it will not get staged and will not be uploaded to the online version of GitHub. Let's go ahead and go back into our index file, and let's delete the paragraph, and let's add an H2. I'll save the page, and as you can see, we now have a new gitignore file, and then we have our modified index file. When we look at the index file, a portion of the file is highlighted in red. That's the part that I deleted. Any new information is going to be highlighted in green. This makes it really easy to see new information and information that you may have deleted. We'll go ahead and make another commit. I'm going to commit to main, and then we'll go ahead and push to our online repository. If we jump back out to the browser and we refresh, all of those changes are going to be added to the online version. Here's my git ignore, and if we check index, it would reflect those changes. As you can see, it's pretty easy to be able to make changes and then upload them. The advantage of using GitHub is that we can always roll back. Let's go ahead and let's go into our editor. And this time I'm going to delete my index file. I'll go back to GitHub and you can see that the whole file has been highlighted in red. I'm going to leave the commit message as delete index and we'll commit to main. And then we'll go ahead and push this up to our online version of GitHub. If we look at the online version, you will see that the index file is going to no longer be present. That's because we've deleted it. Now let's pretend that we've realized we made a horrible mistake and we want that version of the file back. Because GitHub tracks all of the changes, we can easily access any previous version by going into the History tab. If I go ahead and find the delete index commit and right-click on it, I can say revert changes in commit. This is now going to revert those changes. If we go back to our changes file, we're not going to see anything. Now if we go back to the code editor, you will see that the index file is now back. Once we've reverted the changes that we made, the index file is recovered and now it exists in its previous state. I'll go ahead and make a couple more changes to my website, and I'll add some styles to base. If we come back to the GitHub desktop, you'll see that only the base file is showing up. I did not save the index file, so let me do that. And now the index file is going to show up as well. So we'll just go ahead and write updates to website. We'll perform a commit, and we'll go ahead and push these to our online repo. If we refresh the page, you will see that now the index file comes back. And if we look inside the style folder, we are going to have our base.css and it's going to have some code associated with it. Now let's go ahead and work a little bit with branching. Currently, we only have the main branch. I want to create a new branch. You can either use this pull-down menu and you can give the branch a name and select new branch, or you can come up to the menu item and select new branch. Either way is going to specify that you make a new branch name. When you name branches, don't use spaces. So I'm just going to call mine contact-page. I'll click create branch, and now you can see that the current branch is the contact page. Let's go into our editor. And currently the main branch and the contact branch are exactly the same, but we're going to make some changes to the contact branch. I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder called pages. I'll add a file into that folder and we'll call it contact. And let's just add some boilerplate code to this page and I'll go ahead and save. If we come back to our GitHub desktop, you will see that we now have a new page here. I'm going to go ahead and leave the commit message as create contact.html. I'll commit to the contact page. And now let's go ahead and publish this branch. If we refresh our online GitHub repository, you will see that this branch doesn't show up. And that's because we are currently looking at the main branch. Now there is an indication that we have two branches. So I'm going to switch from main to the contact page branch. Once I do this, you will see that here is our pages folder. Any other changes that we've made will exist within this particular branch. If I switch branches in the GitHub desktop, so if I go from the contact branch back to main, take a look at our code editor. Notice that the pages folder has completely disappeared. It no longer exists. If we look at the folder on our desktop, we don't have the pages folder here either. So if we switch branches one more time and go back to the contact branch, you'll see that the pages folder shows up both in my desktop window and within the code editor. we basically have two separate versions of our project. They live in the same GitHub repository, and depending on what branch we're looking at, we can see the code. Let's go ahead and make a change to index.html. I'm going to delete the h2, and then I'm just going to make a link to our contact page. I'll save my page, and if we come back here, you can see that in the contact page, it's letting me know that I'm deleting the h2 and I'm adding this new content. I'm going to make a commit message and I'll commit the changes. Now let's go ahead and let's push this up to the online version of our project. Now that I have this contact branch and I also have the main branch, what I want to do is I want to merge those changes together. In order to do that, you're going to need to create a pull request. I'll click that here, and when I do that, GitHub is going to take me online. The pull requests need to be performed online. So what's happening here is I need to open a pull request. Here I can write a comment to other people that are working on my team, and I can click Create Pull Request. Generally, if you're working by yourself, there might not be a need to work in branches, but when we work with other people, branching can be very helpful. In Git, a branch is one version of the code base, and the repo can have multiple branches going at the same time. When you're working with other people, using branches is a great way to have everyone working on different features simultaneously. Each branch should be created from the main branch. Then different people can work locally on their own branches, and when they're done with their work, they will want to merge the branch back into the main branch. So what we're going to do is we're going to create this pull request. When we do that, GitHub is going to check and make sure that we're able to merge. As you can see, it's letting me know that this branch has no conflicts with the base branch. So now I'm going to click Merge Pull Request. Once again, I'll need to confirm the merge. And now the pull request has been successfully merged and closed. Once you've done this, you'll have the option to delete the branch. If you're all set, you can go ahead and delete the branch. But if you ever think you might need to roll back to this particular branch, you can go ahead and leave it active as well. I'm going to leave mine active. If we go back to example 1, you will now see that in my main branch, I have the pages folder, which contains the contact.html. The local version of my project has not been updated, so what I need to do now is I need to update that. In order to do that, I'm going to go back to my main branch, and we're going to click Fetch Origin. This is going to initiate a fetch, which is going to check online and see if the files match up. As you can see, it lets me know that a pull request has been created and that the current branch main has commits on GitHub that do not exist. So we're going to go ahead and either click Pull Origin, or we can click this button, and that's going to pull the main branch and update it in my local version. Now that I've done that, if we switch back to our code editor, you will see that we have the pages folder showing, and here is our contact.html page. We are currently in the main branch. So now our main branch has been updated, and we can continue to work on the main branch. Hopefully this gives you some information on how you can work with the GitHub desktop. The GitHub desktop makes it very easy for you to work with your files locally and then be able to upload them to your online repository. You can also work with other people, and if you do so, you're going to want to work on branches. GitHub is an excellent application that allows you to collaborate with other people or simply work with yourself and keep a history of all of the changes that you've done within your project. I think you'll get a lot of use with GitHub. As you can see, it's very powerful and it helps you to keep track of all of the changes that you've made within your project.